very much. Welcome to everybody. Delighted to be participating, or Imagine and Charles were delighted to be participating in the festival today. And very honored to have with us today Manuel Hinds, who is the author of In Defense of Liberal Democracy, What We Need to Do to Heal a Divided America, a very timely book, a book that I was really pleased to acquire and to bring to market and to help share this really important message that Mr. Hinds has for us all. I want to tell you a little bit about Manuel before we get started, and then I'm going to ask him a few questions. Manuel is from El Salvador and he's an economist, a very distinguished economist, kind of I call him a Renaissance man, because he's not just an economist, but somebody who's very comfortable in the areas of history and culture and in world history as well as American history. He's has been a consultant to private and public institutions, including a long and distinguished relationship with the World Bank. He was the Minister of Finance in El Salvador twice, the first time from 1979 to 1980, but then also later on between 95 and 99. And as a division chief at the World Bank, he worked with more than 30 different countries. So he has tremendous global experience, not just in economics, but in politics as well. In 2000 and 2004, he was the Whitney Shepherdson Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations in New York. He's the author of several books, not just our book, In Defense of Liberal Democracy, but also the book, The Triumph of the Flexible Society, The Connectivity Revolution, and Resistance to Change, and Playing Monopoly with the Devil, a great title about dollarization and the domestic currencies in developing countries. And he was also the co-author of Money, Markets, and Sovereignty, which won the 2010 Manhattan Institute Hyatt Prize. He lives in El Salvador, but spends a lot of time in New York in the United States and in Florida as well. And Manuel, first of all, welcome, and it's a very great pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much. Hello, hello, Dana. Hello, everyone.
So Manuel, as I've described in your introduction, you're very much you're a scholar and a writer, but you're also a man who's been very active in world politics and in global economics. And I thought it might be best to start by telling us a little bit about your background and how the scholarly and the practical, how both sides of your experience and your expertise inform your writing, and especially this book, In Defense of Liberal Democracy.
Yeah, yes. Well, thank you very much. Well, really, I think that the most important part of my experience, my background, is the time I spent working with so many people in 30 different countries and for a very long period. That really, of course, I am an engineer, which is good because engineer teaches you to focus on problems, rather than on slices of reality as in the normal disciplines. You have to solve a problem. To design a car, you have to take into account many different branches of physics and so on. Okay, well, that's good, and then I am an economist, but what really informs my writing is my experience with so many people in so many different countries, with cultural differences, and also seeing these countries evolve through time. If there is a lesson, something that really, I think, guides my writing, is that I learn to give importance to things that you don't see, very subtle things, of which I'm going to mention two. One is the social order, and the second is how attitudes, are important to determine the social order. The social order is what you see everywhere. For example, in the United States, when you go and you say, this is the character of the country, because even you could go to the post office, or you could go to a court of justice, or you can go to a private company, and you see more or less the same kind of mentality guiding everything, and you see something that to me is crucial. You see a structure. there is this structure on which you can build. If you go to the United States and you want to start a country, you will find that you have very good laws, you have very good people, you can find everything that you really need to establish and this, doesn't happen in other countries, in developing countries. That's the first one. But the second one is that this software framework depends on the attitudes of the people. That you don't see that one-on-one in individual thing, but when you see it from a perspective, you see that everything has a certain coherence, and that really gives the country its character. When you say, for example, this is the American way of life or something like that, there is something very concrete, really, that you are talking about. And then, I think that one of the most important things that really characterizes the United States is this combination of self-interest with social interest. This is extremely important. When you go to the United States, you realize that people have give a lot of importance to the community, to the school of the children, to what to do with the local park and so on, and that builds one on top of the other, really going up. And that you don't find that in other countries. Many people think that this is given by laws. But they say, what you need is a very good law on this. No, it is not, because most other countries have wonderful laws, but they don't work like that, because, the social order is inside the people. It's something that you are, you are raised with these values and principles and so on, okay? Now, what really concerned me after reaching this, after understanding the world in this way, was seeing that the United States is losing that. In the last few years, you see this lack of social cohesion in the United States. And people initially didn't want to see it. But now I think that people suddenly have realized that this is true, and that there is a very big problem in the United States, not regarding technology, not regarding the economy, or you have not forgotten, how to establish a business. No, the problem is more fundamental. Is the country is losing its social cohesion. You don't see it, but really it is extremely important. I think it's crucial to keep the United States going, to keep that. And that is the subject of my book.
Yeah, that's interesting, Manuel. And I know that as you were writing the book and then as we were working on it to bring it together and bring it to publication, many things were happening in the United States which fed right into your thesis. And what I find really interesting about the book is that there is quite a bit of history in it. There's a lot about challenges that both the world and the United States had over the years, and how different systems, political systems in different countries dealt with those challenges. But then also it brings it right up to today, very timely in terms of looking at polarization in not just the United States, but throughout the world. And also this lack of an ability for groups with different interests to compromise and come together and to unite. And I think it would be interesting if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you came to such a weighty and important subject. How did you choose that subject, and when you decided to write about liberal democracy and about the threats to it currently?
Yes, well, I came to it. Actually, I didn't choose the subject. I think that the subject chose me. It's just thinking, with my natural curiosity, what is going on in the world, and then seeing that the United States was losing this this cohesion. Then I started thinking, what happens if you lose your cohesion? What is what is what is the consequence of losing your cohesion? Number one, and then what things could be happening today that are helping to this process, you know, this divisiveness that is taking the country. And then I came to, I saw one thing, you know, that it was very similar, the kind of problems, this losing of social cohesion was very similar to something that happened 100 years ago, you know, when the Industrial Revolution was at the peak, at the turn of the 20th century. And in that moment, you will see that in many countries, all the industrializing countries, there was this something very, very similar to what we are seeing now. You know, that almost everything creates a divisive line throughout the entire society. And you will see that this was happening in the United States, Germany, Russia, Britain, and so on, all the countries that were industrializing. And then I thought, well, how is it that in industrialization or a technological revolution could create divisiveness? And then I came to the conclusion, it's very easy when you think about it. You know, the technological revolution changes the way you produce and operate in the economy. You know, if you were, for example, you were building sailboats, and then somebody invents the motorboat, you know, there is a huge disruption in your business, you know, because you are no longer, either you produce engines, and maybe you are not prepared to produce motorboats, or you are simply, you know, you go to oblivion, you know, because somebody else will do it. And this is really a source of stress in society. But there is something else, you know, which is even more stressful, is that the impact of the new technologies is not symmetrical. You know, some people will see the new technologies and will gain from them immediately, and then they will become very rich. Like, for example, Jeff Bezos. Okay, but on the other hand, there are people who cannot adjust immediately to this, the transformation that is taking place in society, and they are left behind. And then you start seeing this very big differentiation, this division in society, in which many people are gaining and many people are losing from the same thing. And number three, which I think is very important, this is related to the level of education. And then you see that people that were left behind before in terms of education, now because of the new technologies are being left behind even more, okay? So I found that there was this concrete mechanism of transmission between the technological revolution and the divisiveness. Of course, the thing comes, you know, the real, the crucial point is that the United States and Germany went through the same process, exactly the same. But the United States came out with liberal democracy, with freedom for all the people, you know, with a society based on the rights of the individual, and Germany went into Nazism and fascism. Okay, what was the difference? There, the difference is in the attitudes of the people, in the, you know, in the divisiveness. Why? You know, because in the United States, people organize themselves around compromise. You know,
Mm.
when you have these conflicts that come with a technological revolution, you have two ways of resolving them. One is to have one single emperor who will say everybody has to do this, and there are many people who think that this is the best way to do that. But then you end up with a Hitler. And the other kind is like the United States. No, what we are going to do is, even if it takes us some more time to make decisions, we are going to do it democratically. We are going to understand each other, and we are going to compromise. And that was the big difference. So in a divisive society, you don't have this ability to compromise. And that's the really concerning thing about what is going on now in the United States.
That's interesting, and I know that you spend a lot of time in the book, Manuel, talking about what you call the connectivity revolution and how it has had such a profound impact on the shape of the globe, the connectedness of the globe. Perhaps you could talk for a couple of minutes, if you would, about the fact that, you know, in a smaller world, in a shrinking globe, what kind of impact that's had on our politics, and how, you know, how, for example, the threats to democracy that we've experienced in the United States just in the last couple of years are partly a result of this globalization, or an inability to accept globalization and to take the right steps that we need to in order to adjust to that new world.
Yes, of course. You know, at first I think it is important to say that we are living through a technological revolution that is completely different from the Industrial Revolution. You know, the Industrial Revolution multiplied the power of the muscle. This one multiplies the power of the mind in two main ways. The first is, or there are three ways. The first is the computers. Just the computer multiplies the power of our minds. But also, you know, it multiplies it because it puts people in contact directly, mind to mind. And the other one is that it allows us to coordinate complex tasks at a distance.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the first impact was the third one. The first impact was that companies in the United States started to see that they could not compete with companies, let's say the United States and Japan. You know, Japan was able in the 1980s to produce better and cheaper TV sets, for example, than the United States. And then, you know, these companies realized, the companies in the United States, like say Motorola, they realized that they could not compete because they were spending too much in labor without the unskilled labor. That really, you know, the Japanese were earning much less than in the United States. And because of that, Japan was becoming more competitive. But Japan at the time could not produce the same kind of intellectual development that the United States had. You know, they in the United States had much better engineers. So they said, we are going to specialize. We are going to produce all the things that really require American talent in the United States, and the things that could be produced elsewhere, which are the lower technologies, things we are going to produce elsewhere. And that was the start of globalization. So it is, people think of globalization as a phenomenon of trade. It is not a phenomenon of trade. It's a phenomenon of production, you know, which the United, for example, you have Apple. Apple, which is the largest enterprise now in the United States, you know, Apple doesn't produce anything visible, you know. Everything is produced in China. They subcontract that to the Chinese because that's something that the Chinese can do. But the design, you know, of of all the things, the advancements in science and so on, they come from the United States. The company in the United States, they don't have factories in the United States. They only have intellectual factories. Okay, so because of that, the United States gave this tremendous advance and established, created this new revolution of thought. Now there is a market of things that you don't see, like Uber. You cannot see Uber. They don't have cars, they don't have buildings, they don't have anything. The only thing that they do is relationships. They create relationships. Okay, that's the new revolution. Okay, so what you have now in going on is that the United States is moving to a higher level of productivity, the productivity of the mind. The problem is that not everybody in the United States is prepared to go along with this. They were producing the things that were not sophisticated before, and they don't have. And they don't have a way of integrating into the new revolution. Okay, that really becomes a very big problem. So that's the first problem created by the connectivity. The ability to control things from around the world. But there are others, which is, the ability of the social media, because this communication, this ability to communicate has gone to everybody. It has created a horizontal society. And then, in this horizontal society, you can use these new technologies to lie, to create divisiveness and so on. And for reasons we could discuss later, there are many politicians and many businesses who really profit from creating divisiveness. And this is something that we have to learn how to control as well. It's very similar to what happened with the yellow press when coming in the Industrial Revolution. People were very, very concerned that these scandals coming out every day, in the yellow press, would destabilize the countries. And some countries learn to control that in a democratic way, and some others had to go to tyrannies to control them.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And what's also interesting to me, Manuel, is the fact that when the pandemic hit and we were all put into a position where, or most of us were put into a position where we had to work from home, or when we get together as we are today, we're getting together virtually. We're using the elements of that revolution that you described to recreate something that we could only previously do person to person. And I have to think that after the pandemic is over, people's habits are going to change. And these habits are not just economic, but they're also political, and they're also profound, especially in the way that you described. When people lose the ability to do something that was important to a culture and is no longer important, they need to be re-educated. And I know you spend quite a bit of time in your book talking about the importance of education and the importance of retraining and of people making the adjustment, and how a democratic culture, a liberal democratic culture, supports that kind of change and adjustment more successfully than what you call a one-dimensional society.
Yes, yes. I think it is important, to clarify what is a one-dimensional society and a multidimensional society. And we are going to use that concept. One-dimensional society is one when you live for one issue, okay? Which is, I'm going to control the society. I want power or I want money, and that's the only thing I care about. If you live in such a society, then you will find continuous conflicts you know, between people, because if you are my competitor, you are my enemy because I want to get rich and rich and rich. Or if you are another politician, you know, you want power, 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 total power, and we both want total power. If we think in that way, you will always have only one dimension in which you end up saying you either kill or are killed. You know, there is no other possibility. That is completely different from a multidimensional society, you know, in which people have many different interests, you know, they have many different activities, many different, and they also have this social interest. They say, well, yes, I want to be rich, but I don't want to become an enemy of Kevin, okay? So, you know, let's see how we can find solutions to problems so that Kevin will be happy and I will be happy. You know, maybe we are not 100% happy, but actually we will be more than 100% happy because we will have something that is sustainable.
Yeah.
You know, and that is crucial. Okay, now if we come to the pandemic, you know, the pandemic is accelerating all these trends we were discussing, you know, because companies would eventually come to this structure of working from away, from afar, you know, but it would take maybe 10, 15 years to do it. Now, because of the pandemic, it has happened in 1 year, you know, and they have discovered that this is a better way of managing the companies.
Yeah.
So many people will be left unemployed, you know, and many places, you know, like buildings and so on, will be unemployed also.
Yeah.
So what we are having with this pandemic, we will have a crisis of acceleration of change, which could accelerate the divisiveness. But then, you know, in this moment, the government is doing this thing about having very big fiscal deficits, you know, injecting a lot of money into the economy, which could be fine. I'm not saying that this is not good. Maybe, you know, maybe they're overdoing it, but the problem is that they don't solve the real problem. You know, even if you inject a lot of money in the economy, there are many people that will never be employed if they don't gain new skills. You know, you have to help people to adjust to this new world. You know, it's during the Industrial Revolution, you could have increased the amount of money circulating in the economy, but then people who were displaced by tractors would be unemployed. You know, so so that's the difference. We have to understand what is the real nature of the problem. We have to adjust to a completely new world.
And I like how your argument that liberal democracy provides the institutions, the attitudes, and the combination of multidimensional forces to allow that to happen. I also like, Manuel, how in the book you talk about some very specific challenges to American multidimensional thinking. You say it is a crucial part of who we are, but you also point out that historically there have been things like slavery, populism, and social polarization. These are specific barriers to social and democratic equality that I think you cover really well. And perhaps you talk a little bit about how history can help us to understand how to deal with the legacy of some of those challenges.
Yes. Yeah. Now we are talking about, I think, the most crucial point, you know, because it is very easy to say we are going to change policies, we are going to inject more money in the economy and so on. We are talking about changing our minds, changing our attitudes, you know, because And then we can use history to see how things, how people in the United States really have been able to change their minds. You know, that's why I am optimistic about this. You know, it's we tend to underestimate the challenges that the country has faced in the past. You can imagine 13 different colonies, you know, dependent from one country, okay, not interdependent among them, you know. It's and then, you know, take one country, the size of the United States in that time, but also look at the size of the country today. All came from that. How could these people do it? You know, it's they had to change. You know, I am from Massachusetts, you know, and we do things like this here. And the other guy, you know, he was from North Carolina, you know, which are completely different people there, you know, and they decided, you know, there is this concept, this conception of one country, a United States that we are going to fight for. And to do that, we have to compromise. You know, for that purpose, we are going to compromise a lot of things that, you know, we have in this moment. Our self-interest could be this, but actually we have to get this big thing, and then we have to have this social interest for the rest of it. That was incredible to create that, you know. And then you have the case of, you know, in this arrangement, part of the compromise was that some people believed in slavery and they kept the slavery, and some people did not believe that. I think that, you know, one of the most important expressions of what was going on was when Abraham Lincoln said, you know, one house cannot stand divided against itself, you know, and that is either we go as slavery or we go free. We cannot be in this mix. And that was a new challenge. You know, that was a challenge that came up from the inside of people, you know. It was not something that came from external circumstances. It was that, you know, the society was understanding that they have to opt for something, and they opted for that. And it was a cruel civil war and so on. They went through that. But then, you know, it came the Industrial Revolution. And the United States has been a country, an agricultural country, you know, with people living far from each other and so on. And then suddenly, you know, these big forces of industrialization, and it became urban. People started to live together, and they started saying, we want to have much more to do, much more to say about what is going on. And then also industry started to show that it was giving a lot of wealth, but at the same time it was unstable. And then suddenly, when you have a downturn, many people, you know, millions of people could be left unemployed. And then, you know, this was a completely new way of looking at things. You know, before this, it was, well, anybody, we are all free, we can do whatever. You know, we are not going to be concerned if you are unemployed. But then, you know, the country realized this is a problem, this is a very serious problem for a very important part of the United States, of our population. We have to work for this, you know, so that we are going to isolate people from these fluctuations. And they did that. And that was Social Security, the New Deal, okay? Now, you know, but then there was this idea. In order to grow, you know, in order to develop, we have to first produce, and then we are going to distribute. So first we become rich, and then we educate the population. But the problem is that we are going into the knowledge economy. you know, as we were discussing, you know,
Yeah.
the future is with the mind. So if you don't have human capital, if you don't educate your people and your people is not healthy, you're not going to produce. You're going to lag behind the rest of the world. So, you know, now, from now on, you cannot say, you know, well, I don't have children, education is not my problem. That change in mentality, it has to take place now, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you know, Manuel, another thing I really like about the book is the way that you go into these crises in to the American social and political and technological order in detail: the Civil War, slavery, the Depression, the New Deal, the the connectivity revolution, and you show how both the country managed to overcome these crises, but also how those crises continue to stay with us in different ways, and how they require constant vigilance and attention, and how it's never complete, and that the liberal democratic experiment is by no means complete. And I know that as you were concluding this book, the 2020 presidential election was taking place, and as we all know, the great message from President Biden coming out of the election was a need for unity and a need to heal wounds. And I was wondering, after writing this book and going through the history of the last few years, you know, how hopeful you are about the United States being able to heal those wounds of polarization, which continue to be there, of course, but also looking at other countries throughout the world, and especially that we live in a globalized society. You know, are we in a position where we can feel confident that other countries will reject one-dimensional thinking and embrace a liberal democratic approach and a cooperative, unified global approach to, to the world's problems?
Yeah, well, I am optimistic, you know, for the reasons I said. You know, the country has overcome several times this kind of problems, you know, but there are terrible, terrible obstacles now. You know, one of the most, there is always this possibility of going one way or the other. You know, you can go, many people think, you know, that if you are confronting so many problems, you need a dictator. And they say, well, this is what the Romans did. You know, when they were confronting such a terrible problem like this, a crisis, they would say, we need a dictator, and they would appoint a dictator. And the other one is the way of the liberal democracy. The problem is when you adopt the dictator, besides, you know, I think the most important thing is you lose your freedom and so on, you know, but the problem is that you eliminate diversity, and diversity is the source of creativity. And the creativity is the only way, the only thing that we really need to make a good adjustment to our problems. You know, so if you want to go that other way, you will end up with Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, and so on. So when we want to, if we want to get out of this problem, we have to understand also, you know, that the populist has three things, three instruments, three things to do. You know, a populist is somebody who is pretending to do something for the people, but actually they never try to help the people. You know, everything that they do is oriented to giving the impression. Because of that, they don't achieve anything. You know, it's there's no something, there's nothing that they can show the population, and because of that, they have to find a way to gather support from the population, and that is divisiveness. You know, what the populists, if you analyze what they do, they start divide. They try to be tremendously divisive. But then, you know, they have to find an enemy, and they will blame that enemy for all the divisiveness and all the other problems. You know, this is what Hitler did, you know, with the Jews. Okay, there were two identities, I would say, to Hitler. One, you know, was the victim. He was saying, look, we Germans, we are being destroyed and so on. But then the other one was the culprits are the Jews. Okay, and then in those circumstances, what you are doing is you are using divisiveness to create a unity against a minority. And this is something that you start to see in the United States. You know, people who are starting to fight each other and saying all the problems are the culprit, you know, this group is the culprit for all the problems in the country, and the other saying the same. And then you are fragmenting more and more the country. And then you are opening the door for somebody to come and really find one victim group and then unify all of them together against that victim. Yeah. That is extremely dangerous.
And that's a very good way of summarizing how you've used history, Manuel, in the book to give us a great sense of what our current issues are and what we need to do about them. And I'd like to end today by, you know, drawing attention to the last sentence in your book, which is a very striking sentence. And you say that now is our 70-76 moment. And I'm curious about, you know, how you came up with that phrase and what you mean by it and why you used it to end your book.
Yes, I think it is very important because I think the founding fathers are you know, collectively, they were the best geniuses, political geniuses in history. Incredible what they did, you know, to create a nation, you know, a social order for a nation that, you know, was going to last not 10 years. It was forever. So they had to find a way, a social order that would withstand problems that they could not envisage. You know, it was impossible. They couldn't know that the Industrial Revolution would come and that liberal democracy would survive, and they could not know. You know, so they are not talking about policies. They were talking about this social order, this set of relationships. What are the things, you know, that if we have social interest, will make this country work? You know, but there are two sides to it. Okay, yeah. There are two sides to it. One is the system. Okay, this checks and balances, and this is laws, but the other one, the most important, is we have to have the social interest to make this work. If we don't make, you know, these institutions work, then nothing of this is going to be useful. Okay, so that moment in which they said all this can be reduced to the system and our willingness to, you know, have cohesion, to compromise with the others, to have a social interest, to have an interest in the United States is going to die. Okay. And that is, you know, the miracle of what they did. Now we are facing a completely different problem, but also it is, you have to recreate the country again, so because there are many institutions that will have to be changed because the relationships that they were supposed to channel do not exist anymore. And there are new relationships, there are new ideas, so the institutions have to channel all these new things. Okay, that's it. That's one thing. But the other one, you have to have a compromise. We are going to sustain this country. We are going to care for the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the 1776 moment.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful way to conclude the book. I also love the way that you bring the history that you describe, right from the earliest times to the most recent election, so that we can see a real connection in your argument between what's gone in the past and what's happening now before our very eyes. You have things to say about the 2020 election, about the fact that the former president did not accept the will of the people, and how that is a perfect example of a one-dimensional, non-compromising approach that polarizes, and it ultimately is a I think a populist, what you would define as a populist
Exactly.
response to democracy and a threat to democracy.
Exactly. There is something that there was a question somebody asked me before, which was, the former President Trump was really a political genius, or was he responding to something that was happening in society? And actually, the answer is, he's not a political genius. He is a person who really wants to do what he wants with everybody. And the point is that it is society, it's individuals who have looked for him. They were looking for a Trump, and they found a Trump. But if Trump is not there, they will find another Trump. Mm-hmm. And that's the real problem, because it is not that of course, the way his character and so on, he worsened this problem, this lack of compromise, lack of willingness to compromise. But the lack of willingness to compromise was there to begin with. And that is the real problem. And that is the 1776 moment. If you really want to end up, with a completely fragmented country, go for these authoritarian leaders.
Yeah. Well, Manuel, this has been fascinating and interesting, and I think a very good representation of what you were trying to achieve in defense of liberal democracy. One question here. I encourage other people, if they have any questions before we finish up now, to please drop them into the chat box. And one question I have here is, if you have any plans for any further books, or what you have, what you're looking forward to in your career at this point, now that you're retired as an economist, or maybe you're not, maybe you continue to be, but what are your plans from this point?
Well, I'm not retired as an economist, but really I think that the economy is not the most important thing in this moment. It's this is one of the points of the book also, that people tend to think that liberal democracy and capitalism are only about the economy. And actually the economy is a consequence of the way, you structure the entire society on the basis of freedom, of social interest and so on. Now, what I am watching what is going on, to define what is going to happen, what will be my next book about, to see, what are the things that we have not thought that we have to think about, keep on working on eliminating divisiveness, recreate social cohesion, and have a good adjustment within the principles of liberal democracy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we